Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly specific biblical framework designed for relationships. We'll be looking closely at a teaching by Pastor Vlad Savchuk, which outlines 7 distinct archetypes of women that his sermon warns Christian men to avoid. Our objective here is to clearly, objectively, and comprehensively break down this source material. We're going to look at the behaviors, the biblical references, and the underlying warnings presented in this teaching.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sure we really grasp this framework, we've organized these 7 profiles into 5 logical themes: the threat to destiny, seduction and contention, manipulation and control, spiritual and practical instability, and finally, developing spiritual discernment.
Starting right off with Section 1, the threat to destiny, and what we're calling the Samson paradox.
So, before we even list the specific profiles, the source anchors its whole message on one fundamental problem: how the wrong partnership can absolutely derail your life's purpose. To really set the stakes here, Pastor Savchuk points to the paradox of Samson from the book of Judges. Think about it. Samson was literally physically invincible, right? No army could touch the guy, no weapon could bring him down, and yet he was ultimately defeated by words, tears, and just relentless emotional pressure. It's a perfect illustration of how brute physical strength offers zero protection against relational vulnerability.
Now, the core premise of this source material is that the enemy actively studies your weaknesses. The idea here is that what can't be taken by force is often taken through a relationship. And importantly, the source emphasizes this isn't just about romantic pursuits either. These destructive dynamics can totally show up in close friends, spiritual collaborators, or confidants. The door to your destiny, whether we're talking romantic or platonic, is exactly the same.
Moving right along to Section 2, seduction and contention. These are the overtly destructive archetypes.
The source kicks things off by focusing on behaviors that are just overtly destructive to a man's peace and calling, starting with the seducer. Heavily warned against in Proverbs chapters 5, 6, and 7, this brilliantly illustrates how vulnerability actually works. Just like Samson had a documented pattern with women long before Delilah came along, the source argues that this profile specifically targets an open door or a pre-existing pattern in a man's life. She leads with physical appeal and flattery, sure, but ultimately, she extracts his anointing, his resources, and his reputation.
The source creates a really stark contrast here. It's like honey going in, but a sword coming out. It compares the immediate, intoxicating appeal of physical and emotional pull with its absolutely catastrophic ultimate cost. The warning is severe here. If a partner's primary currency is physical pull that isn't matched by godly character, the fire they offer will eventually burn the whole house to the ground.
Next up, we have the contentious woman. The source points out something really interesting. King Solomon likely wrote this specific proverb out of deep personal pain. Having had 700 wives and 300 concubines, Solomon realized amidst all that relational chaos that living completely alone in a harsh, unforgiving wilderness is actually far more valuable than living with contention. In other words, peace is prioritized over presence.
But contention doesn't always mean explosive shouting matches. The source describes it as a relentless, daily drip of tension. It's like this perpetual bad emotional weather that just never clears up. It can be super passive, like an eye roll, a cold shoulder, or this constant criticism that makes a partner feel like they're just never enough. The biblical example given here is Job's wife, who, right in her husband's absolute hardest season, told him to literally curse God and die. It drove him away from his faith rather than toward it.
All right, let's jump to Section 3. Manipulation and control. We're looking at tactics of spiritual and emotional leverage here.
This brings us to the Jezebel. Now, what's really fascinating about this concept is the very careful caveat the source provides. This isn't just describing a strong-willed woman or someone who occasionally disagrees with you. No, the source defines this as a specific biblical spirit of spiritual manipulation. It draws on the historical queen Jezebel, who controlled King Ahab and essentially used religious authority as a weapon to eliminate anyone who got in her way.
The practical signs of this control are highly specific, according to the explainer source. She controls through guilt, completely refuses to submit to accountability, and strategically isolates a man from his closest friends. But most dangerously, she uses spiritual language to override his personal discernment. The source draws a really pointed conclusion here. A woman who cannot be led by God cannot possibly be of help to a man that God is leading.
Another profile that fits perfectly under this theme of manipulation is the woman who weaponizes tears.
The explainer's source contrasts genuine tears, the kind that stem from real pain and vulnerability, with weaponized tears, which are basically a deliberate strategy. Using Delilah as the prime example again, the source explains how she didn't overpower Samson physically. She exhausted him emotionally by questioning his love every single day. Over time, a man managing this constant emotional state just becomes conflict avoidant. He ends up capitulating simply because he's emotionally exhausted.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, Spiritual and Practical Instability. This is all about misalignment in faith and purpose.
Here we're looking at the unbeliever, or the unequally yoked partner. The source notes that while she might be incredibly kind and beautiful, not sharing the same faith leads to a perpetual spiritual war inside the home. A very specific danger is highlighted here for spiritual men. A woman might be deeply attracted to a man's calling or his anointing, but she has absolutely no actual relationship with the God who gave him that gift. Basically, she wants the benefits without the sacrifice.
Then there's the idle woman. Drawing from Proverbs 14 and 1 Timothy, the text contrasts a wise woman who builds her house up with vision against an idle or foolish woman who just gradually pulls it down. The real danger of idleness is that a lack of settled purpose naturally breathes meddling and gossip. The source argues that if she has no governing purpose and no discipline over her time, she will casually, almost thoughtlessly, dismantle the very life you're trying to build. And that brings us to the final and supposedly most deceptive archetype on the list. It's heavily based on James 1:8, the double-minded woman. The source really stresses that this principle is universal. Anyone who's double-minded is unstable in all their ways, not just a few of them.
According to the source, this one is actually the most deceptive profile of the bunch. The double-minded woman loves God and the world simultaneously. Her Monday lifestyle completely contradicts her Sunday worship. So why is this so dangerous? Well, because she's close enough to church culture to speak the language, making her appear totally safe. Her partial authenticity disarms a man's discernment. But as the source notes, building a life requires a fully settled, completely non-negotiable foundation in faith.
All right, Section 5, Developing Spiritual Discernment, Solutions and Caveats.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth can this framework be navigated without becoming paranoid, suspicious, or just plain cruel? Well, the source actively addresses this, firmly stating that this teaching is absolutely not permission to be hard-headed. Every single woman mentioned in these categories is someone God is still working on, and they need to be approached with wisdom and compassion, never with contempt.
So the crucial point here is making the distinction between a wounded woman and someone who has weaponized her wounds. A wounded person, they need compassion, time, and the right community to heal. A man can pray for her and be kind to her. But the boundary the source draws is that you do not have to tie your destiny to her or build your life with her while she's still in the middle of a spiritual war and hasn't yet fully surrendered to God.
The ultimate solution offered to men here is all about internal preparation. You simply cannot discern well if you are desperate, because as the source bluntly puts it, a hungry man will eat anything. To avoid these profiles, a man must first fill himself with purpose and faith. By eliminating that impulsivity and becoming completely full on his own, he can actually afford to wait for the right partner. True discernment flows out of a fulfilled place.
Finding the right partner is described as finding favor and receiving a blessing directly connected to your life's purpose. Conversely, the wrong partner is seen as a counterfeit offered up by the enemy just to distract you. And the tricky part? This counterfeit won't look obvious. It's going to look familiar, it will feel good, and it might even seem spiritual or urgent at the time.
Which brings us to a final, crucial question, based on all the material we've just unpacked today. Are you building a settled foundation of purpose for yourself before seeking a partner? We hope this explainer has given you a really clear, structured understanding of this relational framework and the deep concepts behind it. Thanks for joining us.